of the fundamental things to understand organizational behavior is one's perception. What do we mean by perception? Perception is a process by which individuals organize and interpret their sensory impressions in order to give meaning to their environment. This is basically the result of how we understand the stimuli we receive from the environment. One's perception involves 5 senses, which are sense of touch, sight, hearing, smell, and taste. Through these senses, an individual becomes aware of the stimuli he received from the environment, which leads to the cognitive process where such stimuli are interpreted and response is made. Perception is important in understanding one's behavior because everyone perceives the world differently, therefore approaches the life problems differently as well. One's perception may be affected by a few number of things. The factors that may influence perception relate to the perceiver, the perceived or the target, and the situation. Such factors may be external or internal. When an individual looks at a target and attempts to interpret what he sees, that interpretation is heavily influenced by personal characteristics of the individual perceiver. Personal characteristics of perceiver may be linked to his attitudes, motives, interests, expectations, and experiences. This is obviously one of the reasons why people have different perceptions, because people also can be distinguished by their personalities. Characteristics of the target can also affect what is being perceived. This would include attractiveness, gregariousness, and our tendency to group similar things together. For instance, the size of the target. We have the so-called principle of size, which states that the larger the object, the more probability there is for it to be perceived, therefore attracting the perceiver more, which dominates anything else and enhances the perceptual selection. The context in which we see objects or events also influences our attention. This could include time, heat, light, or other situational factors.
Person perception, making judgment about others. The perception concepts include person perceptions or the perceptions people form about each other. Many of our perceptions of others are formed by first impressions and small cues that have little supporting evidence. Let's unravel some of our human tendencies that interfere with correct person perception, beginning with the evidence behind attribution theory. Attribution theory. Non-living objects such as desks, machines, and buildings are subject to the laws of nature, but they have no beliefs, motives, or intentions. People do. When we observe people, we attempt to explain their behavior. Our perception and judgment of a person's actions are influenced by the assumptions. Consider how often you make this kind of judgment every day. Let's take a closer look at how person perception works and the impact it has on our day-to-day interactions with other people. When you meet with a new co-worker, you immediately begin to develop an initial impression to this person. When you visit the grocery store after work, you might draw conclusions about the cashier who checks you out, even though you know very little about this person. For example, if you learn that a new coworker is very happy, you might immediately assume that she is also friendly, kind, and generous, but they can also contribute to stereotyping and errors.
Decision-making in organization. Decision-making refers to making choices among alternative courses of action, which may also include inaction. While it can be argued that management is making decisions, half of the decisions made by managers fail. Therefore, increasing effectiveness in decision-making is an important part of maximizing effectiveness at work. There are different decision-making models designed to improve the way we make decisions in organizations. Number 1. The rational decision making. This model describes a series of steps that decision makers should consider if their goal is to maximize the quality of their outcomes. The steps are: define the problem, identify the decision criteria, allocate weights to the criteria, develop the alternatives, evaluate the alternatives, and select the best alternative. Number 2. The bounded rationality model. Individuals knowingly limit their options to a manageable set and choose the best alternative without conducting an exhaustive search for alternatives. An important part of the bounded rationality approach is the tendency to satisfy. And number 3, the intuitive decision-making model. It is an unconscious process created from distilled experience. It occurs outside conscious thought. It usually engages the emotion.
Ethical decisions. Ethical decisions making refers to the process of evaluating and choosing among alternatives in a manner consistent with ethical principles. In making ethical decisions, it is necessary to perceive and eliminate unethical options and select the best ethical alternative. 3 ethical decisions criteria. An individual can use 3 different criteria in making ethical choices. Number 1. Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism proposes making decisions solely on the basis of their outcomes, ideally to provide the greatest good for the greatest number. Number 2. Rights in decision making. An emphasis on rights on decision making means respecting and protecting the basic rights of individuals, such as the right to privacy, free speech, and high profits. Number 3. Justice. Justice imposed and enforced fairly and impartially to ensure justice or an equitable distribution of benefits and costs. Steps of the ethical decision making. First, gather the facts. Second, define the ethical issues. Third, identify the affected parties. Fourth, identify the consequences. Fifth, identify the obligations. Sixth, consider your character and integrity. Seventh, think creatively about potential actions. 8. Check your gut. 9. Decide on the proper ethical action and can be prepared with opposing arguments. Ways to improve decision making. 1. Analyze the situation and adjust your decision making style to fit the situation. 2. Be aware of biases and try to limit their impact. 3. Combine rational analysis with intuition to increase decision-making effectiveness. 4. Don't assume that your specific decision style is appropriate to every situation. And 5. Enhance personal creativity by looking for novel solutions.